Welcome to The Rest is Giant Robots, a conversation through the careers of writer Simon Furman and artist Andrew Wildman. Recollections and revelations about the highs and the lows as creatives in comics, books, games, film and TV.
So welcome to our first podcast as Wildfur. This is Simon Furman. I'm with Andrew Wildman, and we've been working together on Transformers on and off now for 40 years, which is pretty much the length of the brand. And we thought this was a good time to get together and talk about some of those 40 years, some of our shared experiences, and some recollections from the industry, and just how to be a comics writer, artist, how to branch out into other things, such as computer games, advertising, TV, animation. We'll take you through the whole works. And Andrew, it's 40 years now this year since Transformers launched, and I guess it's been pretty much a mainstay and bedrock throughout our careers.
Yeah, certainly has, yeah.
And I thought this might be a good time just to wind the clock back and think about what we were doing, where we were in those careers 40 years ago.
I'm kind of guessing, Simon, that your memory's probably better than mine, but I will dig back and I will try to sweep aside all the detritus that gets in the way of my memory. And yes, we'll do that. We'll go back in time. So what were you doing then 40 years ago, Simon?
I was working for IPC magazines. You know, I was already in the industry a little bit, even in the comics industry by now. So there was definitely a case of, I knew what I wanted to be doing career-wise, but Transformers were still on the horizon as far as I knew. And you know, I was working on Scream, which was a kids' horror comic. IPC had seen a gap in the market for a companion to 2000 AD, but instead of sci-fi, it was going to be short horror stories.
Oh.
And I'd been taken on as sub-editor. My editor was Ian Rimmer, who's going to be fundamental in what happens next. But at that time, I was happily ensconced at IPC. I'd been there for 4 years or more by now and just moved into the main comics producing side of IPC and starting to do my first bits of comic script writing, which was also very exciting. I'd never dreamed growing up reading comics that you could make a career in it. And here I was doing just that, you know, behind the scenes and doing some actual proper comic script writing.
So you were right. You were in at IPC right at the beginning of the 80s then, which seems an inordinately long time ago to most people listening, I would imagine.
Yeah, it really does. It seems it to me.
Yeah.
I joined their competitions department, training to be a journalist, because IPC was so huge and had such a range of different magazines for different demographics, age groups, everything. They had a centralized department for writing, judging, doing the results of editorial competitions, everything from win a car, win a holiday, down to win a lunar module kit. You know, it was it was everything, anything and everything. And it meant writing copy for titles as diverse as Popular Gardening, Practical Hi-Fi, Woman's Own, Buster Comic. You know, it could be anything.
Yeah.
So it was a good grounding in how to write in different voices, different tones at different levels.
Yeah. So what were your aspirations then as a journalist? Where did you see yourself going in the future if your eyes were on journalism? Was it like magazine journalism, or what kind of thing did you aspire to?
Yeah, I don't think I was cut out for newspaper journalism. I don't think I had that slightly cutthroat instinct. I guess you need to be a good journalist. But yes, some kind of magazine journalist. You know, I guess I had half an idea of working on a film magazine or something in the music business. IPC published NME, which again, I read avidly at the time. Yeah. So yeah, something along those lines, magazine or a targeted newspaper or or some kind of editorial job within that. And
Yeah.
the job gave me the training. I was on courses all the time. And frankly, when I was offered the job on Scream, I was a little hesitant because that wasn't the career trajectory I thought. And it came with an element of risk. Nothing was as secure if the comic was cancelled, which
Mm.
prophetically it was. I would be really out of a job, and I loved working in competitions department. So yeah, it came with some risks, but the bonus was I'd been a huge comics fan and was again by this point. So the idea of working on comics, on, writing stories, working with artists was just too good to resist.
What kind of comics were you reading at that point? You said you'd kind of rediscovered comics in a way. What were you reading?
I'd found things like Warrior,
Oh, okay.
some of the new sort of wave of stuff that was coming out in Britain. I was reading stuff like Dark Knight Returns and
Mm.
Claremont's X-Men and Swamp Thing. There was a great it was a great time to be reading comics again because comics had sort of grown up and you could see what could be done with comics as opposed to the comics I remember or even just Marvel comics. They seem to have a new opening doors of possibilities with comics, and that's what really appealed to me.
Yeah, Warrior was certainly groundbreaking at the time. Yeah, I remember that well. So I can quite see why you would then feel re-inspired to maybe think about moving in the comics direction. Because obviously I would imagine, like me, by the way, as you know, Simon, but other people probably don't know, we are, bar a couple of months, the same age. So we would have grown up with the same material, both being English boys, born in 1961. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was reading probably the same comics you were reading, like Valiant and Lion and
Yes. Yes.
Smash and all those ones that, strangely now my career has somewhat come full circle because I'm working with Rebellion on their Treasury of British Comics series, which is readdressing those characters I was reading back then. I've just finished for Rebellion a Kelly's Eye story
Hmm.
and Kelly's Eye was a strip in Valiant at the time. So it's very, very much come full circle, my career.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about you? Where were you in 84?
Where was I in 1984? Okay, so I graduated from college in 1982, which is kind of key. So I studied graphic design at Leicester Polytechnic, which is now De Montfort University. I did hardly any work, to be honest, because in the old days you could get away with that. All the work I had in my degree show, I think I probably did in pretty much the last week. Um, but I was a big comics fan, yeah, very definitely. And like you, around about that time, I was getting very re-inspired by what was happening in comics, having grown up with the Marvel comics through the 60s were great. They were few and far between in the UK. British comics had been great, but Marvel comics kind of captured my imagination. So I went to college determined to be a comic book artist, which was just in no way ever going to be on the horizon, really. But that was the thing that kind of got me into drawing. So while I was I think it was the last year at college, um, I read in the back of a fanzine or something that there was an organization, a club in London, in the West End of London, that used to gather every month, called the Society of Strip Illustration, or SSI for short. So I saw this date and I went along. I don't know whether you had to write to them and ask if you could go along, but they were a group of professional strip illustrators and writers, most of which were newspaper strip writers and artists. Um, but they had taken in a lot of new blood around that time to kind of I don't know, just to make it a bit more of a contemporary organization. And what they'd also done is they'd made the decision to take on associate members. So associate members were people who weren't necessarily professionals, but like committed amateurs, I suppose. And it was just a way of encouraging new blood into the industry. Um, so I went along to that. And in some ways, that gradually put me in touch with people within the industry. But I wasn't getting any paid work at all. I was meeting all the right people, and that was key, but I wasn't getting any paid work. In 1984, by that time I'd left college. I was married, and I'd left college, gone back to live in Bedford, which is where I grew up. I was living in a flat with my then new wife, Leslie, and I was working in a design studio with a couple of other people. That we set up in 1982. It didn't do particularly well. We kind of scraped a living, just enough to pay for bread and water for a couple of years, and then that didn't work. So I got a full-time job with a company up in Nottingham as a graphic designer, running their design studio, which sounds very grand, but it wasn't. The company was a garment label printing company. And so I was in charge of putting together the artwork for garment labels, which was basically just words and washing instructions. So, it certainly wasn't a London design agency. But because it was the early 80s, there was a trend at that time for clothes to have nicely designed labels on the outside, with logos and slogans and all that kind of thing. So that made it a bit interesting. But in 1984, and probably just into 1985, I got in touch with a company in Manchester called London Editions, and they were doing comics. They were doing like He-Man comics and, kind of licensed stuff. So 84, I was probably just having early conversations with them. But I don't think I actually did any paid work for them until probably 1985, by which time our first child arrived. So I was it was a bit of a side hustle for me, trying to earn a bit of money on the side. I was still full-time as a graphic designer, but Transformers, I didn't know it existed.
Yeah, I mean, me neither at the time. And the only connecting tissue for me between Scream and Transformers is the aforementioned Ian Rimmer, who was my editor on Scream. And when Scream folded, basically there was a National Union of Journalists strike. The management at IPC, who were very antsy about the content of Scream, because they feared a sort of Daily Mail backlash. Even though they kicked the whole ball off, they really got very worried and censorial about the content. I think, like I say, they were worried. It was the era of video nasties, and they were worried about some kind of outcry from outraged of suburbia. So
Yeah.
as soon as they could, and the journalists, the dispute with the NUJ, which was a very valid dispute, was the perfect excuse for them to say some things just aren't coming back. They've been damaged too much there was a hiatus on Scream of a few months, and a lot of things just restarted. Scream didn't, and we were all made unemployed. I mean, we were made redundant. We were paid off and made redundant, which at the time I wasn't too terribly worried about, because I suddenly had a nice severance paycheck from IPC, and I thought, great, I'll be a freelance comics writer.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But once again, you just find the reality of that isn't quite what you hoped it would be. I got most of my work on Scream because other writers either sort of disappeared on us or fell behind on their deadlines, and I had to jump in. So actually finding work for myself was a chore. And Ian had gone straight pretty much from IPC to Marvel UK, where he became editor of Captain Britain Monthly. And we kept in touch. I hadn't really sort of said to him, look, find me some work or find me a position at Marvel. But we just kept in touch. We'd got on really well. And that was the connective tissue. And when Ian, who realized I was looking for work, found out that the Transformers office, the fledgling Transformers office at Marvel UK, was looking for UK writers to come in and pitch stories, he very kindly put me in touch with Sheila Cranner, who was the editor over there. And this was before I came on staff. He just said, come and meet Sheila, have a chat with her. And that's exactly what I did. And that probably, we're talking tail end of 84 here, even though even though stories didn't appear till 85. I think it was sort of the tail end of 84 that I was in the Marvel offices talking to Sheila.
Wow. And where were Marvel UK then? Because I know they moved around a little bit in London over the years, didn't they?
Yeah, they were in Redan Place at that time, which was in Bayswater, just round the corner from Whiteley's, the big department store.
Right.
And so, I was more than happy and delighted to go up there and talk to somebody who might be able to give me some proper paying freelance work.
And so what was the incarnation of Marvel at that time as opposed to the incarnation of Marvel UK that we would have read the comics of when we were a little bit younger? So Mighty World of Marvel, that kind of thing. Was it a completely different company or just a new version of the same company?
I think it was a new version of the same company. I mean, they still did things like Spider-Man comics weekly or monthly, which was largely reprinting US material. But Transformers kind of marked a sea change because it moved them into the licensing arena.
Was that the first licensed book they did, or?
It could have been. I mean, they'd done some originated stuff by this point. One incarnation of Mighty World of Marvel had Captain Britain and Night Raven and other material in it. Captain Britain Monthly had backup strips as well as the lead strip. So they were doing origination. I think there'd been some originated Hulk stories in Hulk Weekly. So there was like a gradual curve. Des Skin, who most industry people know as one of the movers and shakers who created Warrior and that whole buzz, had been an editor at Marvel UK and had pushed for more origination. So by the time I came along, they were doing origination, but I have a feeling, if not the first, it was one of the very early licensed product experiments. So I just went in with no idea what Transformers was. I think Ian may even have said, we're just launching this comic and there's a chance of some work. So I didn't even know what I was going in to talk about until I got there.
And so when that happened with Transformers, how does that key in time-wise? They're probably quite small time kind of margins here, but how did that key in time-wise with the Marvel US book and the animated movie? Which came first and all that kind of thing?
Well, there were two things. I mean, Marvel, I know this from having met and talked to and sat next to in panels with Bob Budiansky, that Transformers for them started around November 1983, when they had been approached by Hasbro because Marvel had done the G.I. Joe comic and that had been very successful. And Hasbro had acquired Transformers license kind of back from Japan, and these characters, often without names, they'd gone to Marvel editorial. Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief, who'd done a treatment based on the toys of, that developed the whole world and backstory. And then Bob Budiansky came in to flesh that out and create the character bios and everything else. So that started way back in 83. The Marvel Transformers comic came out in mid to late 84, around the same time as the animated TV show was airing.
Right.
At the time, what existed at Marvel UK were the first 4 issues of what had planned to be a mini series at Marvel US, but had suddenly been given that next lease of life as an ongoing. And they were going to obviously reprint those first 4 issues, but because the comic was going to be a fortnightly and eventually a weekly, they just didn't have enough material, even though it was going to be ongoing. They could see that a weekly or a fortnightly comic was going to run out of comic strip material pretty quickly. So when I met Sheila, it was to talk about the fact that they'd already got one British creative team, which was Steve Parkhouse and John Ridgway, creating a story called Man of Iron. And that was designed to fit almost anywhere, because we didn't really know, or they didn't really know, where the US story was going next. The Transformers stories that they wanted Steve to produce and then me to produce had to be sort of self-contained and almost exist in a bubble. So whatever the American story was next, it wouldn't impact on that.
So I guess the American books were kind of that original comics format, in as much as there wasn't any progression from issue to issue. Would that be the case? So, each issue would start pretty much the same, finish pretty much the same way it started, so that, there was no change in the world. Nobody died, nobody got older, or things didn't change. Was that how they ran it? Or did they have a story arc at that point?
No story arc. And it was very much make it a self-contained, try and, the brief expanded over the years, but originally it was very much like, take some characters, tell a story with them, and put them all back where they were beforehand.
Put them all back in the toy box.
Yes, exactly right. Don't kill anyone off. Don't change the underlying status quo.
Yeah.
And if you look at those very early stories, Steve Parkhouse's Man of Iron is a quite quintessentially British tale of a boy and a giant robot and knights in armor and mythology. It has, much later on we tried to integrate it a bit more into the actual flow of Transformers stories, but it exists very timelessly in its own bubble, Man of Iron.
Oh, yeah.
And my first story was the same thing, not the same thing, but it was very much under that aegis of take those characters, have them fight each other, put them all back where they started off, ready for the next run of American stories.
Yeah. So were you, in terms of being given some toys to play with, like, were there specific ones that you were encouraged to use? Was it all about Optimus Prime, etc., or did you have like a long list of characters that you could play with?
There weren't really limitations, only they had to be obviously in the Marvel US series at that time, So you had those original characters, the classic G1 characters. And I realized kind of straight away that using Optimus Prime and Megatron overmuch came with risks, because you couldn't do anything huge to them. And readers of the UK comic might say, well, hang on, what about that? That thing is never referenced again. So I went for not B-list characters, but certainly the less used one. I picked an Autobot called Brawn. I used the Decepticon Ravage, and then I had a Starscream in the mix. And Optimus Prime and Megatron are around, but it was very much focused on that small cast of characters and an interaction and story that involved them, and then is resolved at the end of the story.
Did you choose your particular characters based on information you had about their character traits? Like, what made you choose the particular ones?
Yeah, it was we had all the as they were called, tech specs for the characters, the profiles, their strengths, weaknesses, what they do, their role in the Autobot or Decepticon army. Bob had done such a fantastic job. You could just go, well, there's the perfect character for this story, working on the fish out of water thing, or here's a character that has some kind of issue that we can resolve or partially resolve in a story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was just looking for little cracks. And as we moved on, it was very much looking for the characters that weren't being used as much in the main American storyline. So, even though we're getting ahead of ourselves here, very quickly, Bob got rid of the Dinobots from the main story. So suddenly it was like, brilliant, we can do lots of Dinobot stories because they've just exited stage left of the American storyline.
Yeah. That's when you developed your love for Grimlock, is it?
Absolutely. But yeah, but in those early days when I first met Sheila, obviously this was all none of this 40 years and now counting onwards were even in the ether. It was unlikely, I thought, that I would do more than one story for a start. I thought maybe I'll get another shot at it, but I wasn't the only writer at the time. Obviously, Steve Parkhouse was doing one. There was another writer, James Hill, in the mix.
Right.
So I knew I wasn't the only writer they were approaching. I thought and hoped I'd get to do one or two stories, and it would be a good opener with Marvel UK. The fact that Transformers became this, I don't know, sort of rolling monster that it became,
Yeah.
and more or less shaped my whole career, wasn't even in my mind. It was just a little bit of paying work, and I was freelance back then, so I was very grateful for some kind of income. It was only after that I got to work on staff there and things sort of rolled, and then we became the editors and custodians of Transformers. So
yeah. I mean, back then, toys had a kind of a limited shelf life. TV cartoons had a limited shelf life. Fashion, would dictate that different bits of entertainment would come and go, and obviously nobody would have foreseen how Transformers would have become this popular culture gigantic thing that it is now. So, but I guess you would kind of give each one of those stories, all the love and craftsmanship that it would deserve. But it was probably just as well you didn't know that it was going to be the weight of history would be on your shoulders. So you could, have more fun with it. But
and had you heard anything, seen anything about Transformers at this early stage?
Yes, I'd like to say in 84, no. I mean, I don't know when they first started being advertised on television, the toys, etc. But I guess I would have seen and heard those adverts, but not that they would have necessarily registered and because we had our first child in 1985, who was a girl, and then son arrived in 87. So there, as toys or cartoon series, they wouldn't have been on my radar at all. My first introduction to Marvel UK came about because after I left college, I was before I started working as a graphic designer, I did a year, as we all did in those early days. We tried to be freelance in, whatever was our dream. So I had a year of trying to be a freelance artist and probably had like 2 small commissions from a friend down the road. So it wasn't going particularly well, which is why I then moved into graphic design. But my career in comics completely overlapped with my graphic design full-time work for probably, let's see, I had my first printed stuff on He-Man for London editions in 1985. And I worked full-time as a graphic designer until 1989. So all the early comics stuff that I was doing was overlapping with that. So He-Man, and then I did a Brave Star comic for the same publisher. But I was trying to find a way to knock on the door of Marvel UK. And fortunately for me, somebody who was at, well, who was also at Leicester Polytechnic that I didn't know very well, he was a year younger than me. In his second year, I think he did a work placement, like a short-term work placement at Marvel UK. And then somebody in my year knew him, and they kind of introduced me to him because I was a comics fan. This guy was obviously a comics fan. Um, and then I kind of got into conversation with him, a few years later. That was John Tomlinson, who we all know now. But yeah, so I got in touch with him saying, "Oh, hi, we were both at Leicester. How do I get some work on comics then?" And he gave me a 2-page tryout for Thundercats. Yeah, it was Thundercats. He said, "Well, do these 2 pages, draw these up from this little bit of script, and if we like what you draw, then we might give you some work." And they liked what I did, and they gave me some work. And that would probably be, when would that have been? Yeah, that was probably about 87, getting on for 88. And so I did a fair bit of Thundercats, a couple of other little bits and pieces for them. I don't know where Real Ghostbusters fitted in, but round about that time. But my first work on Transformers and my first kind of exposure to Transformers, which I had heard of, but I didn't know what it was as such. It was just robots and turning into cars, as far as I knew. But so I was doing the Thundercats comic, and I would post the pages in because I was living in Nottingham at the time, and I would post them into Steve White, who was the editor on Thundercats. But if I was going into town to one of the SSI meetings, which I was still going to, I would take the trip into the Marvel UK offices and hand over the pages by hand, because it's always nice to, meet the people and have a chat, whatever. And so a story I've often told when being asked is I some of my memory is still relatively clear. So I do fairly vividly. That's a oxymoron, isn't it? Anyway, I do remember going into the office with a bundle of pages and handing them over to Steve, and the guy sitting at the desk next to him kind of leant across and had a look, and obviously liked what he saw and said, do you fancy drawing some Transformers? And I was like, okay, what is it? And so I was told what it was. It was these robots, and they transform into vehicles and back again, etc., etc. And so it was a bit of a Woody Allen moment for me, whereas, the words that I was coming out of my mouth didn't match what was in my head. So the words that came out of my mouth were, yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'd love to do some of that, because I was young and I wanted more work. What was going on inside my head was, I don't want to draw robots. Why do I want to draw robots? I'm doing Thundercats. I want to draw superheroes eventually. So Thundercats is the closest thing in the UK that we get to drawing superheroes, because they're very humanoid. But that was a seminal moment. I mean, that person who offered me that work was a Mr. Simon Furman. And there we go.
Yeah, it's funny how, in my head, you were involved much earlier than that, but of course you weren't. This was almost, when you first did your, first interior strip work for us, it was probably towards the end of my involvement with the comic as editor, because I left Marvel UK on staff-wise in early 1989 and went freelance.
Wow. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was probably one of the last, you were probably one of the last new artists I brought on board to Transformers.
Yeah, I probably did. I think maybe covers was the first things I did. I do remember doing a Dinobot strip, but that I think was it written by Ian Rimmer? I
I think it was
remember.
written, I think it was actually written by Steve.
Oh, was it? Oh, it's dinosaurs. Of course it would be.
Yes, and it was in one of the Transformers annuals, Destiny of the Dinobots or something like that.
So I don't know whether that came before or after some of the early covers that I did. I remember the first, or my memory of the first Transformers cover I did. I don't know what number it was, but it had got Soundwave on the cover. And so I was asked to do this, and I was shown pictures of this character. We want this character standing tall on the cover, da da da. And I remember asking the question, saying, "Is that Optimus Prime?" Eye rolls from all who were gathered. Yeah, so I didn't really know much about it, but it was work. I enjoyed doing the bits of work and getting the paycheck. And that some of those early covers I do remember signing them and putting 88 on them, so that there was at least a couple that were 1988, which was while I was still working as a graphic designer as well. So I was doing this stuff evenings and weekends in the spare bedroom in the house. So I was really burning the candle at both ends, doing a full-time job all day, and then a lot of my time, evenings and weekends, was spent drawing whatever they would throw at me.
Yeah, I mean, I was much the same. I was on staff at Marvel UK and writing. And by that time, probably I was writing Transformers and Dragon's Claws and Death's Head. And this was all done at weekends and after work. I suppose it was just we were young then and we could do that stuff. But
we had more energy then. So it's all waned a bit now.
But that's kind of how I guess both of us got our first taste of Transformers, and
yeah,
then there's many more twists and turns to it as we go along.
Yeah, as we will cover in future episodes.
Indeed.
Fantastic. Anything else that we could add to just flesh that out and sign it off? What do you reckon?
Yeah.
Probably not. Okay, well, let's leave it there for now, and we'll come back next time, dig a little bit more into those early days, and maybe a little bit about what we're up to now, but mainly pick up where we left off, what came next for Furman and Wildman in Transformers. Thank you for listening to The Rest is Giant Robots. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider subscribing for more and maybe share with like-minded friends. This has been a Wildfur production.